Hi, everyone. So this teaching from Vatican II on voting is to further the common good. But what does it mean? So let's ground it in the realities of our time. The common good offers an antidote to what Pope Francis calls the malign culture we live in. He describes this culture as a culture of self, individualistic, transactional, dehumanizing, that's tearing our societies apart. This culture stems from a philosophy going back to the Enlightenment, but it morphed into neoliberalism, and over the past 45 years, it's accelerated with economic, social, cultural, and spiritual consequences. So let's look at its features. Same thing in all the countries that adopted its operating system. We see vast concentrations of corporate wealth power alongside unprecedented inequality and poverty in all its forms. Its commodification of creation led to a degradation of the natural world. Its careless globalization left whole communities discarded, resulting in a politics of abandonment, a breach of the common good. It's had a tendency to decentralize state powers way beyond what the welfare state was intended for. Increasingly, decisions are being taken outside the democratic process. Pope Francis actually warns about the rise of what he calls the dangerous technocratic paradigm. And now this culture is generating a collusion between the powers of capital and state, where governments are acting in the interests of big corporations, insulating them from democratic accountability. Some are describing this as the machine, or we could conceive of these powers as the modern pharaohs. So this over-centralizing of power erodes civil society. It grooms us to outsource responsibilities we used to carry, to become more dependent on products and on services than on each other. And it weakens mutual obligation, and it weakens our local institutions. It generates symptoms of human distress, including widespread loneliness and an explosion of mental health issues. Its overemphasis on rights and the neglect of mutual responsibility has led to the culture of self, which effectively is an assault on relationship. It's caused the breakdown of social trust and led to the emergence of identitarian politics on both the right and the left. So this system has been perpetuated by all political parties in the UK over a 40-year period. Such gross mismanagement is provoking a political blowback, and dissent gets framed as extremism by a dominant cultural narrative that constrains the range of acceptable opinion. This has resulted in a disconnect with the majority of the population. So in brief, that's what Pope Francis is talking about. But in Catholic social teaching, we have an antidote. The common good is the antidote to the culture of individualism. So this is how the bishops describe it. They say it's the sum of all those social conditions which allow the human dignity of all to be respected, their basic needs to be met, while giving men and women the freedom to assume responsibility for their own lives. And at Together for the Common Good, we give the definition a bit more granularity. We say that common good is the shared life of a society in which everyone can flourish as we act together in different ways that all contribute towards that goal, enabled by social conditions that mean every single person can participate. We create these conditions and pursue that goal by working together across our differences, each of us taking responsibility according to our calling and ability. So let me set out some of the basic assumptions of the common good. It's inspired by the gospel, and the common good starts with what it means to be human. Our identity is in God. And from this, it assumes that each person is worthy of love and affection. It encourages virtue, and it places trust in ordinary people, whilst being realistic about human fallibility. And it insists on human agency and true freedom in God, not the false freedoms promised by either consumerist or collectivist ideologies. So the common good arises from people's free participation. God made us as social beings who thrive in relationship. And so in the common good, the interests of the individual are balanced with those of the community. Every person is of equal value under God, and yet not meant to be equal, but designed to complement one another. As Catherine of Siena said when she was discerning the mind of God, she said, I have given many gifts and graces with such diversity that I have not given everything to one single person, so that you may be constrained to practice charity towards one another. So God intentionally made us to need each other. That's the common good, and that's the taste of the kingdom. So the common good is based on the recognition of reality, on natural law, and it acknowledges people's different histories of class, of socioeconomic background, of ethnicity, sex, age, ability, experience, and education. And it seeks to balance people's different interests. It rests on the principle of solidarity. The common good is strengthened when we join together across our different interests, and it's undermined when we're isolated, separated, or divided by group identity categories. And in keeping with the principle of subsidiarity, it emphasizes a balance between rights and responsibilities. And it's realized through local and regional institutions like associations, clubs, small businesses, religious organizations, and so on, in which individuals can find purpose and which together resist the dominance of capital and state. And as in 1 Corinthians, the common good conceptualizes the human family as one body in which the poor are given the most honor. So the common good requires a shared life with poor communities because this allows us to see as God sees. So the common good is also place-based and it's embodied. It's not abstract. It balances local and global, particularity and universality. People flourish when they participate in a common life where they live and work. And the dignity of work is a cornerstone of a politics of the common good. While social security is necessary in a low-wage economy, the common good emphasizes a justice that prioritizes decent jobs over welfare. So sometimes I find it helpful to look at what the common good is not. It's not the greatest happiness for the greatest number. That's a utilitarian proposition, quite different from the Christian justice tradition, which is relational. And the common good is not woolly. It's not some vague idea where all values are equal, nor is it a you do you and I'll do me liberalism. That leads to a battle of rights. And it's not utopian either. Utopian thinking often sounds great, but it involves coercion. So the common good is not something like a medicine that's good for you or that justifies some kind of top-down imposition. It can't be imposed or delivered by technocratic collectivist systems and their promises such as equality of outcome. That is not common good. And Pope Francis warns how the malign culture subordinates human agency through centralized power and atomized consumerism. So the common good isn't compatible with identity politics ideology. For example, it can't be achieved in a safe space by the removal of dissent. The common good requires negotiation, diversity of opinion, listening, mutual respect, forbearance, forgiveness, and the possibility of redemption. As Sister Helen Alford said in a recent event we held, social peace requires deliberation and freedom of expression within the rule of law. Also, the common good is not welfarist. Pope Francis states that utilitarian solutions only mitigate injustice, masking the prophetic, propping up toxic systems. And finally, it's not partisan and it's not tribal. So we've seen what the common good is not. Now let's look at what it looks like in practice. So the conditions required for the common good can't be by definition generated only by government. It involves the taking of responsibility at all levels. So let's look at these: international, national, regional, local, personal. So we're thinking here of subsidiarity, where decisions are taken closest to those they affect, and where a central authority shouldn't do what can be done better at a local level. So what would the common good look like at international level? Well, it would look like international solidarity rather than globalization. In other words, relationships of cooperation between sovereign states rather than a supranational world government. And in the same way, global corporates would not operate with impunity, but be accountable to national governments. The powers must be distributed and held accountable by people through democratic political processes. So then at national level, the common good requires governments creating conditions in which families and communities can thrive. For example, This might look like reform of the economy along the lines recommended by Catholic social teaching. So that means deconcentrating the powers of international giants by enabling regional and local banks and energy providers, for example. It would require an industrial strategy, integrating investment and job creation with environmental measures and retraining to correct the abandonment of the left behind communities. And it would mean a balance between capital and labour, for example, mandating workers on corporate boards, encouraging trades unions, incentivising the real living wage. And it would include family support, upholding family autonomy in education, incentivising affordable housing, providing supportive tax incentives and benefits, and so on. And in terms, for example, of a common good migration policy, it would balance the interests of incoming and host communities by upholding both a fair border policy and humane treatment. Immigration policy would not be used as an economic tactic to depress wages in the interests of big corporations, as it is now. It would require not only the host communities to welcome the stranger, but also their consent. It would also not only uphold the rights and dignities of incomers, but also require their responsibility to integrate. So at regional level, what might the common good include? Well, it would particularly include institutional collaboration, say between educational institutions, employers, investors, communities, dioceses, other regional bodies, all working together towards economic and social renewal of their region, balancing the interests of all involved. And at local level, the common good might look like the strengthening of local institutions. So local government helping to create conditions that enable people to run their own local organizations. It would look like a healthy mix of local associations, clubs, businesses, schools, charities, and religious bodies, each fulfilling what John Paul II called their vocational responsibility, each meeting local needs and working together for the good of the community and supporting families. And it would look like lots of mutually beneficial relationships and the fostering of common purpose between estranged interests, say between business and unions, between young and old, between urban and rural, and so on. And churches would support and encourage these local relationships and forge long-term relationships of reciprocity with poor communities, in particular, acting in solidarity according to need. And at personal and family level, our contributions to the common good might look like strong families in all their variety, helping each other and their neighbours, dedicated to teaching their young people the importance of responsibility and relationship. And it would look like people in the neighbourhood, building local relationships together, accompanying each other in a shared life. So the common good is active, practical, and it requires our involvement. It's fundamentally relational, and within it, we discover elements of the kingdom. It can't be imposed, and it's messier and more beautifully human than any utopian ideal could be. In fact, it's what keeps us human. So there you go, that's the common good in very short time.